Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is going to be creating a template that is going to be adding all the inputs of a form. For us, it's going to be using a different component, and we're going to do validations, we're going to do everything else, but we're going to be doing everything in a different way with controlled and uncontrolled. We're going to do something else. And we're going to do this. It's going to be a little bit hard to understand. It's going to be a little bit confusing, but this is going to be an approach, more realistic approach. Okay. So let's begin building this. I'm going to go to the user view. So if I go to user, I get just nothing, just user. I'm going to delete this and I'm going to be starting doing this. I'm going to say class name and I'm going to give it a class name of container, just like the other ones, container. And inside here, we're going to have a form, and this form will have an onSubmit. Of course, we don't have that function, but we will create it in a few seconds. So it's going to be calling whenever we submit the form. We're going to use a function that calls onSubmit. It's going to be called submit form. Make sense? Good. What else? We need a button right here. So we're going to say button, and this one is going to be saying submit. And right here, we're going to have the type of the button, which is going to be submit, right? Good. So now in the middle, we should be getting all the inputs. If I check this, we get nothing, but we're going to be doing something different right now. The main idea of doing all of this is to call to a component to include a child component that is going to be receiving some state. Now inside the state, we can have all the inputs that this component needs to create. I'm going to go to state and I'm going to create a new key that is going to be called form data, just like that. And this form data is going to have a bunch of information. So let's say we want to add a name and a last name input, just like we did before. Okay, so I'm going to say name, and then I'm going to pass a lot of values. So this name, first I need to specify which type of input we want to add. So we're going to say element, and this is going to be kind of the name of what we want to add. So it's going to be input. And of course, don't worry, this is going to make sense in a minute. This input is going to have a value of nothing whenever the application renders. Now we can have each input is going to have a label. So I'm going to specify if we want a label for this one. So I'm going to say label true. I'm going to do comma. What else do we need? If the label is true, we need to have a label text. So I'm going to say label and text. And the text for this one is going to be name, right? Okay. So now each input contains a configuration, just like a name, the input type, and maybe a placeholder. So I'm going to create a new value that is going to be called config. And this config is going to contain all the options of what we need. So this input is going to have a name, and I'm going to give it a name of name input. Make sense? I'm going to do comma. This input is going to be of type, and it's going to be of type text. What else? We're going to be adding a placeholder. So it's going to be placeholder. And this placeholder is going to have a placeholder of enter your name. So pretty much all of this information is what we need to create an input right from a template, right? We have the name, the text, the placeholder, the value, the label, and the type of the element. In this case is an input. I'm going to be creating a new one. Right here we have a name. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom. I'm going to copy all this. I'm going to paste it at the bottom. Remember to put a comma because it's an object. And this one is going to be called last name. Okay, good. Now we need to change the things right here. Just change it a little bit. This one is going to be last name. And the name of the input is going to be called last name. And then enter your last name, right? So now what do we do? Why are we doing this? So now the main idea of doing this is that we're going to create a function, a component, that is going to be grabbing this form data. It's going to be looping whatever we have in the form data. It's going to create a template for each input automatically. So if we have 100 inputs, at the end, we can have 100 inputs right here. And the only thing that we need to add is going to be just a new element inside form data. So now this is kind of different because the other way, we have to enter each input manually right here inside the render. So the advantage of using this is that we have a more controlled way to enter inputs, to create inputs. So you're kind of creating a template function to create the form elements. Okay, so now we don't have that function, so we're going to create it right now. I'm going to go to source, and inside source, just like we did before, I'm going to create a new component that is going to be called widgets. Good. Inside this widgets, I'm going to have a new folder that is going to say forms, just to make it a little bit more correct. And inside forms, I'm going to have a new file that is going to be called form fields. You can call this whatever you want. So form fields, of course, is going to be just a function that is going to be receiving whatever we pass right here inside form data, and is going to create the inputs. So I'm going to say import React. Let me make it right. React from, and then React. Good. We need to create, the actual function is going to be called form fields. Yeah, form fields. And this form fields is going to be receiving props, the state of whatever we want to create. And then I'm going to do export default, and then of course, form fields. Oh, it's going to be form. There we go, form fields. Good. So now this form fields is going to be rendering something, of course. So I'm going to be doing a space. I'm going to do return, open and close. And what we do on this return, we want to return, a div with something inside. Now we need to create a function that is going to be grabbing this form data, and it's going to be creating the inputs. So I'm going to say render and then fields. That's the name of the function. We don't have this function. We're going to create it in a minute. Now, for now, I'm going to create it right now so we can skip that error. So I'm going to say const render fields is going to be equal for now, nothing, open and close, and you're not going to do anything. Now we have this component, so we need to include it inside users so we can use that component. So I'm going to go right here at the top. I'm going to say import and then form fields from, and then of course we have .. we enter widgets and we enter forms and we enter form fields. So now this component, it's available for us to use. Okay, good. So now the next step would be to use this component and start passing all the props that we need. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom, and I'm going to be, just creating this. It's going to be form fields, open and close, self-closing tag. Good. So what do we need for this form fields to work? We're going to need all the information about our form, our inputs. So I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to be passing a prompt. So it's going to be form, and I'm going to call it form data. We shouldn't skip this, but whatever. We're going to see why later. So I'm going to say that the form data, the information that we have inside this prop, is going to be this dot state dot and then form data, which is equal to all of this. Good. Right. Well, we're going to be adding a little more stuff right here, but for now, this is all we need. So this form fields is going to receive a prop called forms data. So let's go to form fields, and let's start creating this render fields because it's really important. So, okay, so let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a function. I'm going to create a variable that is going to be storing all the information that we have inside here. Now, if you notice this one, it's not an array of objects. So what we're going to be doing is going to get that props and this form data and, structure the information in the way we need. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom. And I'm going to say const and then form and then array is going to be equal to an array. Good. So now what we need to do, we need to kind of create a way, we need to run a function that is going to be grabbing whatever we have inside form data and is going to be putting the information inside the form array. So I'm going to use a for. Now for it's ES6, they're really good. They are really good to use. It's really useful for us. So first I'm going to create a variable that is going to be called element and then name. Just like that, element name. And what we're going to be looping is going to be the information that we have inside form data. Don't worry, you're going to see this in a minute. So it's going to be props dot, and we're going to be looping form and then data. So now what we are pretty much doing, we are looping this props form data, and on each iteration, we're going to be storing that particular item inside element.name. So what I want to do, I want to grab the item and store it inside form array. So I'm going to say form array dot push, open and close. And what I want to do, first, I want to know the ID of the element. I'm going to put a name of ID, which is going to be the element name. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste it right here. Then I'm going to do comma, I'm going to do settings, just like that, settings. And settings is going to be equal to props dot form data, form data, and I'm going to be putting the element name. I know that this doesn't make sense. I could explain it in a minute, don't worry. And then what I'm going to do console log the form array, just to see what we get. Okay, so let me tell you what is happening. Right here, we are calling this form fields, and we are passing form data as a prop. So it's going to be this. This one is not an array, so we can have two different inputs, the name and the last name. So then, of course, we render fields is going to go to this function, is going to create an empty form array variable. And now that we can be looping this form data. Now on each iteration, of course, we have the data that we have inside each element, and then we have the name of the element, the key. So the main idea of doing this is that we want to create one specific item, just one item for each input that contains an ID, which is going to be, the name of each input. And then inside settings, we can have the rest of the information, which is going to be this one. All right. So let's go right here and, just reload the page. And right here, since we are doing console log form array, we got an array of objects, and each object contains an ID of the name of the input, and then the settings, which is all the configuration that we need to create this element. So now the next thing is going to be running a function, doing something that is going to be looping this form array, and is going to create one input for each ID. Right? One with ID of name, and then another one with ID of last name. Okay. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to delete this, and this one is going to be returning the information that we need to render right here, of course. So I'm going to say return. I'm going to be accessing this form array, and we're going to be looping. I'm going to loop over it. Now each iteration contains an item, and then the iteration number. I'm going to run a function right now. So this function is going to be returning something, and what we are going to be returning is going to be the actual template, the actual input. So I'm going to say div, open and close, and remember that when we iterate over something, we need to pass a key, and the key is going to be the iteration number. I'm going to be adding a class name of form_element. Good. And now inside here, what we need to do, we need to pass the information that we need to create the actual input. We're going to be doing this in a minute. But for now, we can just going to make sure that we are looping everything correctly. So if I say input, and we are passing two different inputs, we should be getting input twice. So, it is kind of working. So now, okay, let's go back to form fields. Now this, whenever we loop, we need to create the input. Now what we're going to be doing, it's going to be creating a function that is going to be entering the data that we have, the configuration, and is going to check for each element which type of element we have. In this case, we have an input. So it's going to access a switch, just like we did before. It's going to access that template, and it's going to be returning a configuration that we have for a type of input. Now, for now, we just have two inputs. It's going to be the same template. But then we're going to be adding a text area and the select, so we can have a different type of elements. If we have a select, the element is going to be select, so it's going to be entering a different template. So, okay, so let's start creating this. So now I'm going to be creating a function. Of course, the video is going to be going too long, so we're going to be going to the next section. But I'm just going to start creating it right now. So this function is going to be called render templates. Makes sense. And on each iteration, I'm going to be passing the item, this item equals to whatever information we have right here on each iteration. Good. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom. I'm going to be calling this render templates that is going to be equal to, a function, and you just open and close it. So this render templates is going to be receiving some data, which is the actual item. Now, whenever we loop this and we find that we create a switch and we find the template that we want to render, we need to access the information that we have inside, inside config. And if you remember, the item contains the information about item dot settings dot and then config. So just to make everything less painful, I'm going to create a variable that is going to be called values. And this values is going to be equal to data.settings. So now instead of doing inside the template data.settings.config and then whatever, we're just going to say values. All right? Just we are creating an alias for this. Now we need a template, so I'm going to say let and then form template that is going to be null at the beginning. Okay? It could be empty, doesn't matter. We're going to say this, doesn't matter. And now right here, we need to create a switch that is going to be checking the data.settings.element, and it's going to be deciding if we want to render an input, a select, or whatever we want to render. So if we want, I'm going to create a switch that is going to be accessing values, dot, and then the element. Now the element, remember, is the type of the element. So it's going to access input. Okay. So I'm going to say, okay, if the case is that we want to render an input, we're going to enter this scenario. Of course, we need to do a break, open and close. And now after this, of course, we're going to need a default case. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom, and I'm going to say default. Now, whenever we have a default, we need to return at least something. So I'm going to say form template is going to be equal to null. So, same thing. We could use null right here at the top. And at the end, whenever we are done with the switch, we want to return the form template. Right. Okay, so now what we need to do, we need to create a template for inputs. So for now, just going to say div, and this one is going to be an input. So if I save it and we go right here, oh, we have render templates. Okay, so it's not defined. I made a mistake with the names. I'm pretty sure about that. Render templates. 1 second. Oh, because, it's a stateless component. So I need to do const. Sorry for that. So, okay, switch, values, and that template. So we have data.settings, values, and element. Let me just change it right here. We have data.settings, and it's plural, of course. Remember that we say settings right here. Okay, that's good. We have nothing so far, but don't worry, we're going to be getting something right here. So let's go to the next section and, start building the actual template.